It is 7:15 on a Tuesday, and you are moving through the turnstiles at the train station the way you have every workday for 6 years. Phone in your right hand, the same cracked one you keep meaning to replace, held out toward the reader without looking, because you never have to look. There is a tap, a soft double beep, a small green light, and the gate swings open. That is the routine, except this morning there is no beep. The light stays red, the gate stays shut, and you walk straight into it, hip first, the way anyone does when the thing that has always worked suddenly does not. You step back and try again. Red. You wake the phone and the screen lights up, but the wallet will not open. Just a wheel, turning, going nowhere. Behind you, the line is already stacking up, a dozen people with their phones out, tapping, stepping back, tapping again. The attendant in the booth is on her feet now, not helping anyone, staring down at her own screen. Along the platform, the departure board flickers and freezes on a schedule from 20 minutes ago. Nobody is angry yet. That part comes later. Right now, it is only confusion, spreading person to person like a cold draft, as a few hundred strangers slowly understand that the problem is not their phones. A man near the ticket machines is holding an old Android, reading aloud to no one in particular. In the space of a single night, without one dramatic event anybody can point to, Apple has collapsed. The services, the accounts, the payments, the whole invisible spine of it, going dark across the planet at the same hour and not coming back. The phones themselves do not shatter or go black. That is the eerie part. The glass still lights up, but everything behind it has stopped answering. You stand there with a bright, frozen rectangle in your hand and a train you can no longer board, and you do not yet understand that this is the smallest problem you will have today. Here is the thing almost nobody in that station ever understood about Apple. It was never really a company that sold phones. The phone was only the doorway. What Apple actually sold to more than 1 billion people was a single account that ran quietly underneath everything else. The place your photographs lived, the vault that held your passwords, the wallet that carried your money and your car key and your boarding pass, the login that proved to every bank and border and hospital that you were you. You did not own a device. You rented a place to keep your entire life, and the landlord had vanished with the only key. Consider the scale of what stopped. More than 2.5 billion active devices. Roughly 166,000 people on Apple's own payroll, and well past 1 million more in the factories that fed it. A company worth more than $4 trillion, larger than the economy of most nations on Earth. And an app store that, by Apple's own accounting, moved $1.3 trillion in goods and services a year. One gateway that a vast share of the digital economy had to pass through to reach anyone at all. That was the real design of the thing, not to sell you a product, but to become the ground the product stood on, so that leaving was almost unthinkable. Those frozen gates and dead wallets were the part that made the news, and they were the easy part. The damage that mattered came slower, and it reached into corners of life nobody thinks to connect to a phone. Give it a few hours, and the losses stop being about money at all. By that afternoon, the loss has stopped being about a train. Hundreds of millions of people are shut out of their own lives at once. The two-factor code that guarded your bank login was generated on a phone that no longer answers. Your passwords sit in a vault that will not open. A woman in Denver cannot get into the account she runs her small business from because the authenticator lived on the device, and the device is a paperweight now. A man tries to rent a car for a family emergency and cannot prove he is who he says. His license was in the wallet, his card was in the wallet is gone. Proving you exist, it turns out, is shockingly hard once the machine that vouched for you goes silent. Everywhere at once, the ordinary machinery of a normal day seizes up. Checkout lines stall as tap to pay dies mid-transaction. Hospitals that had moved patient records and medication scans onto tablets fall back to a pen and paper they had half forgotten how to use. Parking garages will not release cars whose only ticket was an app. An entire layer of small conveniences nobody ever noticed being built announces itself in a matter of hours by the exact way it fails. Within days, the ruin reaches the people who built their livelihoods on top of that store. Somewhere in Austin, a developer who spent 3 years and every dollar of her savings on a single app watches it die between lunch and dinner. The store gone, the payments gone, the app that 500,000 people kept on their phones now frozen, unsellable, unfixable. She had hired two people in the spring. She lays them off by text because there is no other way left to reach them. And she is one of millions. The people who left steady jobs, who paid the annual fee, who handed over a third of every dollar for the right to exist inside the store, all waking on the same morning to one brutal fact: the store had never been theirs at all. They had been renting the customers too. Farther down the chain are the people the owners of those 2.5 billion devices almost never pictured. Not the engineers in California, the smallest and most visible slice, but the million-plus workers in the assembly cities of China, India, and Vietnam, whose entire regional economies had been raised, floor by floor, around one company's orders. In a single complex in Zhengzhou, hundreds of thousands of people had spent years building almost nothing but iPhones. When the orders stop, the lines do not slow, they halt. The dormitories empty inside a month. A factory town with nothing to replace the plant learns in one gray week that the ground beneath it had belonged to someone across an ocean the whole time. If it had ended there, with frozen payments and locked accounts and shuttered factories, it would already rank among the worst days in economic history. It does not end there. This next part is the one no spreadsheet can hold. But the cruelest loss is the one that no bankruptcy filing will ever record, and it belongs to people who were not thinking about phones at all. Consider a man in Portland whose wife died 2 years ago. Every photograph of her, every video with her voice still moving inside it, the last message she ever sent him, all of it lived in an account he had never once thought to question, because it opened every time, on the first try, the way sunrise opens a day. He has tried everything. The password he is certain is right, the recovery email that only loops back to a dead account, the support number that rings into a company that no longer exists. It does not open now. It will not open again. And he is far from alone because an entire generation had moved its memory into that one cloud and simply called it forever. In a single afternoon, the largest deletion of human memory ever recorded happens without one person choosing it. Not because anything was destroyed exactly, but because the only copies were sealed inside a house nobody can enter now, behind a door with no handle on our side. Parents lose the first years of children who are grown. Families lose the only recordings of grandparents already gone. It is a strange kind of grief, mourning something that technically still exists somewhere on a server in a building that will never be opened again. None of this stays digital, and none of it stays in America. Nearly every one of those 2.5 billion devices ran on chips made overwhelmingly by a single company on a single island, TSMC in Taiwan, which had bent much of its production and a large share of a national economy around Apple's demand. Take away the biggest customer of the most advanced factories ever built, and the shock travels straight into the most dangerous fault line in world politics. Currency markets lurch, governments issue statements, and somewhere an engineer says out loud the phrase the whole industry had spent decades pretending did not apply to them. A single point of failure, bin Mati, as the world understands far too late that it had agreed without ever admitting it to build exactly one. The people hurt worst are not the ones who lined up for the newest model. For a large part of the planet, the phone had never been a second screen. It was the only computer they had ever owned, the only bank they had ever been let into, the only address the modern economy would accept. The delivery rider whose income and directions both lived in one app. The grandmother whose blood sugar alerts came to a screen on the nightstand. The refugee whose only proof that he existed at all was a photograph of a document kept in an account he can no longer reach. For them, this is not the loss of a convenience. It is the loss of the single bridge that had ever let them across into the system, and there is no second bridge waiting on the other side. What is left, once the panic burns out and the dust settles, is stranger and slower than the collapse that caused it. 1 year on, the picture is not all ruin. No rival could take in that entire population overnight. So for months, the world is clumsy and half-connected, an entire species relearning things it had forgotten it once knew. How to carry cash, how to find a street without a glowing blue dot, how to keep a copy of anything that matters. But in the gap, something that had been dying for a decade begins to grow back. On a corner in Ohio, in a glass box that used to be an Apple store, a family opens a repair shop, the kind that fixes things instead of sealing them shut. Down the block, a teenager starts a small trade, helping people move what survives of their lives onto machines they actually control. Open standards nobody would touch while the walls stood become the obvious road forward, messaging that crosses any phone, payments that answer to no gatekeeper, machines you are finally allowed to open. Not everything grows back. The photographs that were never downloaded are simply gone. The voices are gone. A forest returns after the tallest tree falls and lets the light down to the floor. But a memory, once it was the only copy, and the copy is lost, does not return at all. In some places, the empty stores are stripped and relet within the year. In others, they stay dark behind the glass, clean and bright and hollow, small monuments to a company that had felt as permanent as weather. Months later, you will pass through that same station, tapping through a turnstile that works again, and for 1 second, you will remember the morning it did not. You will think about how little it took. Not a war, not a crash anyone saw coming, just a screen that stayed dark one beat too long, and the slow understanding that the whole of an ordinary life had been resting, without your ever deciding it should, on something you never saw, in a building you will never visit, run by people you will never meet. That is the quiet lesson of a company like Apple. The things that feel the most permanent are the ones we stop noticing. The ones so smooth, so reliable, so woven into the small hours of a normal day that we forget they were ever a choice at all. We did not simply trust it with our data. We handed one company the memory, the money, and the proof of who we are, and we did it gladly, one convenient morning at a time. Right up until the morning the gate stayed shut, and a few hundred strangers on a train platform learned the same hard thing at once: that the most important door in a modern life was never one they held the key to.